No, no buzz. It'll just be his book club. This could be a little louder, I think. Probably like that. I don't know. Not a ton of difference. It doesn't look like. That's fine, because I don't think I'm going to have a ton of very interesting things to say about Black on Both Sides, A Racial History of Trans Identity by C. Riley Snorton. This is a book that I've been sort of looking at for a while, on and off, and then I had my little resolution at the beginning of this year, at the end of January, really, to try to at least read one sort of meaty piece of nonfiction a month, given how bad I was about doing such a thing last year. Um, which is funny because that's why I crammed in We Do This Till We Free Us, but then I realized at like three-quarters of the way through that book that I had read of Walking on Ice. And then in the middle of this, I fell into the Monsieur Proust library, so I'm at two a month, I guess, at this point. Um, this is what I'm saying is this is my February book, my February nonfiction book, and I had a pretty up and down relationship with it. It's been 15 years or whatever since I was engaged in the academy in such a way that would have made this book contextually relevant in any way, or not relevant, because I think there's a lot of really good stuff in here that I'm glad to have read, but I am no longer steeped in the language in which this book is written, which my, I'd say friend, I think we're friends, I think we've been friends in the past, friend Jesse Darling, JD, once accused me of writing in funeralese when writing in sort of the high academic theory jargon voice. It's a voice that I have moved in and out of over the course of my life as a thinker and writer and talker, I guess sometimes. I'm not currently in a period where it is, uh, you know, um, it is a language in which I am immersed at the moment, and so there are definitely things in here that 10 years ago me would have read and been like, yeah, 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 I gotcha, that currently you're reading was reading and going, okay. I think I get like the broad strokes of this thing, but I'm not going to go read a whole paper on sociogenesis or study the field, and that's okay. I get, so socio and genesis is creation of sociality in some way, probably. I think it's probably a perfectly fine functioning working understanding of this to understand the broad strokes of the sentence, and I'm not going to be engaged in academic debate about this at any time, so I don't really have a strong pressure to push me further, any material pressures, that is to say. Um, yeah, so I'll say I'm not qualified to talk about this book. No, no buzz, baby. Luckily, you have to be a bee to watch this. So, debate me, bee. I would rather not be, thank you. But yeah, um, there's some things I took a little. I don't know. Okay, so I think sort of my high level on Black on Both Sides, A Racial History of Trans Identity, is that from my perspective at least, it is a book that does a bunch of really good archival work. When Snorton is talking about, as in, say, for instance, the first chapter, which is all about J. Marion Sims and sort of um, the birth of, or the beginning, I guess, father of gynecology, the founding of gynecology as a profession, and the way in which Sims affected that, and is focusing not on it as a historic or as a heroic story or a heroic history, but as centering the slave women that Sims not just experimented on brutally and repeatedly for years, but also his own domestic slaves, their role in this, the sort of imagined life worlds that Snorton can sort of extend out to them. All that stuff I think is fantastic. This also goes for uh, the yeah the so yeah, part one starts with that, and then there's the second part is called the second chapter in part one is called Trans Capable Fungibility Fugitivity in the Matter of Being, and that's a lot about sort of the use of cross-gendered so this is one reason why having like a very specific language is useful, in that way. That is why I say that I'm no longer swimming in that same life world. I would just immediately have access to the language that Snorton uses. But the ways that various kinds of gender presentation and representation were used often in the lives of enslaved people, and especially in their escape. I think that's also very good. And then part 3 is chapters 4 and 5. There is A Nightmare Silhouette, which is about a handful of folks. It starts with the story of Christine Jorgensen, who I have learned about a half dozen times and always forget about. The I think veteran, like blonde veteran who publicly transitioned in like the late 40s, early 50s, and was like a hyper celebrity for a couple of years. First as like a curio figure, and then as a statement. How people treat trans people. But then Snorton goes on to talk about a bunch of much less publicized people around the same period, mostly black, who were showing up in newspapers for being arrested for or fined for impersonating a woman, or were getting sort of like hounded out of communities when people found out that they were not really a man. That sort of vibe. All really, really good, interesting history stuff, I think. And my absolute favorite parts of this book. I'm blanking on names now because I always blank on names. Yeah, and then there was, I don't know, I can't, like I said, I don't think I have a ton of interesting things to say about this. The final chapter kind of weirded me out a little bit. It's called Divine's Cut, Public Memory and the Politics of Martyrdom. And it's sort of focalizing Philip Divine, who was a disabled black man that was killed in the same killing that, I'm blanking on the other people's names who are like the much more well-known ones, but the murders that inspired, among other things, the movie Boys Don't Cry, a movie I've never seen. And it does this thing where it spends like the first half of the chapter like self-justifying or arguing for the inclusion of what Snorton calls something. I'm blanking on terminology here. Biomythography. Let's see. Biomythography, then, is a praxis of invention that erupts as a question about, parenthetically, past and present, temporalities in the register of the future imperfect, in which past and future give rise to a set of conditions and responses in the present, and which, as Marriott suggests, finds form in, quote, a moment of inventiveness whose introduction necessarily never arrives and does not stop arriving, and whose destination cannot be foreseen or anticipated, but only repeatedly traveled. End quote. To presence divine, to invent his/a life, then, is to approach phenomenologically the interstitialities of black and trans life and black and trans death, particularly as they bear upon the current conjuncture of black trans life, and spectacularize black trans death, and the roots of public circulation in transgender days of remembrance/resistance, and the Trans Lives Matter and Black Trans Lives Matter movements. There's like what feels like 10 pages of talking about this and how it's useful, and it's probably simply that I didn't follow the argument really at all, but on some level it felt like basically saying like I want to make up a life for Philip Divine that we don't have access to in order to like uh, exemplify certain things, and I don't think that's what Snorton did in any way. But the, at least in my readings, I had a tortured argument of like, and this is like probably as much as anything, this is a University of Minnesota Press book. It is an academic book published by a university, and I know there are standards for certain things, then there are peer reviews that happen and things like that. I guess I don't know for sure that this is a peer-reviewed book specifically, but that sounds to me, again, having been out of that world for a while, like the kind of 10 pages you insert because peer reviewers went hard on you, and you're like, no, here are all the very technical reasons why I am doing the thing I'm doing, and I think I got caught up in the technical um, furniture that was happening in a way that was like, just made me more confused. Yeah, I don't get the sense that at any point Snorton just like straight up makes up biographical details about Divine. I think it's more about synthesizing what is known, and in a different way that allows for this mythographical element to, do what a myth does, sort of clarify aspects of the world through story. That's one of the things a myth does, at least. But yeah, it kind of left a weird moment. I was like, I'm not sure if what you're saying is that you want to lie to me. And I was like, I'm pretty sure it's not what you're saying. But also, I guess I'm just not a good reader of this book, and that's on me. That's not on the book. The other moment that I had some trouble with, and this one I feel like I have firmer ground on, is here. So part 1 is titled Blacken, and it has chapter 1, Anatomically Speaking, Ungendered Flesh and the Science of Sex, which is the history of gynecology, and it has transcapable, as I mentioned. Part 2 is titled Transit. It is just chapter 3, Reading the Trans in Transatlantic Literature, subtitle on the female within three Negro classics. And then part 3 is Blackout, A Nightmarish Silhouette, and Divine's Cut. And then there's acknowledgments and notes and an index. And the notes seem very thorough, which is always a nice thing. And the index seems, I didn't look at the index. I shouldn't should attend to the quality of something that I have literally not looked at. The reading the trans chapter, the transit section. Hold on. Is a sort of extended close reading of the sort of compilation text Three Negro Classics from 1965. It is, can I pull this? It is Booker T. Washington's Up from Slavery. It is W.E.B. Du Bois's, oh wow. And it's also James Weldon Johnson's autobiography of an ex-colored man. Wow, this is pretty embarrassing. Souls of Black Folk. Jesus. So count me as doing a great job of showing how much better suited I am for this section than anything else. Just fucking forgetting Du Bois's book. Jeez. Well, if you'll indulge me, the thing I think I'm a little bit more engaged with is this the sort of action of the chapter is doing a lot of sort of sociological reads of the text, but also engaging with close reading tactics, and that's the thing I would like to bring up very specifically here. So I'm going to read a passage that Snorton quotes from near the end of Washington's Up from Slavery, which I think is 1903, initially published, but republished in 65 under this sort of omnibus edition. That actually the chapter starts in a really fun way, where it's like a quote from like one of the publishers or the editor to another, where they decide like they're deciding on the name of this omnibus edition, and they're basically like, I don't know, the name's not great, but also like we only have so much space on the cover, and everything else is like gotta be longer, and there's like 3 titles or 3 authors that all need to be on the end, so like it sort of saying incidentally that like it's like the choice of typeface and cover space that names the book as much as anything else, which is a little bit of sort of material history that I love. Great archival work again. This is like where I think this book absolutely shines. And it's, fucking embarrassing that I'm sitting here forgetting basic details, but it is what it is. So, taken from sort of what Snorton says is the penultimate chapter of Washington's Up from Slavery. And so I'll be reading a piece, and then I'll read Snorton's sort of close read on the piece. Yeah. I rarely take part in one of those long dinners, but I do not wish that I could put myself back in the little cabin where I was a slave boy, and again go through the experience there, one that I shall never forget, of getting molasses to eat once a week from the, quote, big house. Our usual diet on the plantation was cornbread and pork, but on Sunday morning my mother was permitted to bring down a little molasses from the big house for her 3 children. And when it was received, how I did wish that every day was Sunday. I would get my tin plate and hold it up for the sweet morsel, but I would always shut my eyes while the molasses was being poured out onto the plate, with the hope that when I opened them, I would be surprised to see how much I had got. When I opened my eyes, I would tip the plate in one direction and another, so as to make the molasses spread all over it, in the full belief that there would be more of it and that it would last longer if spread out this way. So strong are my childish impressions of those Sunday morning feasts that it would be pretty hard for anyone to convince me that there is not more molasses on a plate when it is spread all over the plate than when it occupies a little corner, if there is a corner in a plate. At any rate, I have never believed in cornering syrup. My share of the syrup was always about 2 tablespoons full, and those 2 tablespoons of molasses were much more enjoyable to me than is a 14-course dinner after which I am to speak. That's the end of the Washington quote, and now I'll be reading Snorton a little bit, maybe with a little bit of interjection. This sentimental rendering of a childhood memory of black life in captivity sits alongside tips on public speech-making, accounts of worldly travel, and, as the excerpt elucidates by way of a critique, the opulence that characterized Washington's ascended status. On one level, the tableau depicts a moment of care under the conditions of slavery. Yet slavery is also everywhere in the scene, in Washington's description of himself as a slave boy, in the method by which the molasses is procured from the big house, and in the larger process by which the molasses was sourced in the circuits of trade between Caribbean and U.S. plantation economies. I'm reading that sentence and I'm like, ooh, yes, love this, love to throw material conditions into close reads. This is, I'm chugging along with you here. And again, I'm not just positioning myself as an expert on any of this. I'm just sort of elucidating for perhaps my future self things that I felt in, and that's not how I actually internalized that response. This is a representation of how my brain is working in these moments of close reading, especially. Narratively, there is a metonymic link between Washington's mother and the molasses, as the passage figures the mother's relation to her son through syrup. As a matter of fabulation, the death of the mother gives way to a haunting, parenthetically spread all over the plate, as it also mediates the boundary between slavery and freedom in Washington's life. And here I'm like, okay, where, like, I would like that to be elucidated more. Here, what might appear to reaffirm Washington's commitment to humility and frugality is also about the degree to which Washington's mother, in this final accounting, is made palatable, ingestible, as a diffuse presence that reminds her son from whence he came. In this edible arrangement, Washington incorporates his black mother by rendering her a delectable resource in making sense of his self-propulsion. Autobiography, on the other hand, and I definitely had quite a few moments of like, please say more throughout the book. And again, not an expert, not the target audience, not like even somebody who, and not somebody who read this nearly as carefully as I could have, for reasons both personal and material. Right? I'm not incentivized to engage this in any way other than as I would most prefer to, which is mostly, as downtime reading on breaks, so that sort of vibe. So maybe there's a whole scaffolding of, maybe there's a whole architecture happening across that chapter that is being sort of deployed in that moment of the sort of the edible arrangement quote. I couldn't see it. That line just came off as very weird to me. I get that there is a sort of question of the the devouring of across gender roles, and especially across the nurturing roles, that is a feminist critique across a century more at this point, but it doesn't feel quite like an earned moment, that specifically the edible arrangement line, in the same way that much of the archival work felt very, very strong to me. But again, there's an example within even that close reading, the foregrounding of the plantation colonies in the Caribbean and the U.S. that allows for this moment to be possible, I think is extremely sharp and very earned, piece of or use of a critical lens to bring to bear something about the scene that is maybe not immediately apparent. Whereas the edible arrangement thing just it felt like it needed another sentence or two, kind of elaborating on the effects of these things, or the reason that Snorton got to that reading. I don't know. Yeah. Overall, I think I'm quite glad to have read. I'm glad to be sort of swinging back into more complicated nonfiction works. I think the only thing I read last year that was genuinely a thing that challenged me in nonfiction was Palo Alto. And I think that's a fantastic book still. And I also am trying to read a little more broadly in nonfiction, even though I'm kind of pretty sure that I'm going to read a book about eggs next, because it's I don't know, it seems kind of nice. Yeah. Goal is to challenge myself, I think, a little bit more this year in my reading, because everything else is hard, so why not make that hard too? Thanks for not watching.